All right, so we're diving into a topic today that hits close to home for a lot of people. Um, Teen residential treatment.
Yeah,
It can feel kind of heavy, maybe even a little intimidating.
right.
But honestly, whether you're a parent, a teacher, or just, part of a community, understanding this world is crucial for all of us.
Absolutely. And, we hear so much about the challenges of raising teens these days, but the reality is teen substance use is way more common than people realize.
It's like this silent epidemic that's easy to miss if it's not directly impacting your life. I
Right.
mean, get this. Over 40% of youth in the U.S. have tried illicit drugs at least once, and by the time they're seniors in high school, that number jumps to a staggering two-thirds who've tried alcohol.
Wow. Yeah, those statistics are definitely eye-opening.
Yeah, they really are.
And it's not about judging these kids. It's about understanding the unique pressures they're facing.
Right.
Their brains are literally still under construction. They're bombarded with social pressures we often underestimate. And frankly, access to substances is easier than ever in a lot of cases.
Okay, so you've got this perfect storm brewing. It makes sense that sometimes, the typical interventions or support systems just aren't enough,
Exactly.
which is where, I guess, residential treatment comes into play.
Right.
But I'll admit, before I dug into this, I had this like hardcore boot camp image in my head.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's a common misconception for sure.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Residential treatment is way more nuanced than that.
Okay.
It is highly structured, though. I'll
Yeah.
give you that. Consistent schedules, 24/7 supervision.
Okay.
But that structure, it's intentional.
Hmm.
It's designed to create this safe and supportive bubble where teens can really focus solely on their recovery.
So more like a therapeutic bubble than a boot camp.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Research actually shows that longer stays in residential treatment are linked to higher success rates.
Which makes sense if you think about it. I mean, addiction, it's not like a cold you can just get over in a week, right?
Right.
You're talking about deeply ingrained habits, behaviors, thought patterns that take time to unravel.
It takes time to unravel those things.
Right.
And those longer stays, they allow for more than just detox. We're talking comprehensive therapy, building coping mechanisms, addressing underlying trauma, all these things that take time to unpack and heal.
So it's not just about breaking a physical dependence, it's about addressing the emotional and psychological aspects as well.
Exactly. Removing access to the substance,
Yeah.
that's just the first step.
Right.
The real work, the deep work, happens within that structure with trained professionals who can guide them through the process.
Okay, so let's say someone listening is concerned about a teenager in their life. What are some of those signs?
Hmm.
Like, what are the red flags that go beyond your typical teenage mood swings? When does it cross the line from typical teen to, okay, we might need to consider something more intensive, like residential treatment?
It's a crucial question, and I always emphasize that these are just potential indicators, not a diagnosis, right?
Of course, of course.
But one red flag to watch out for is a noticeable decline in personal hygiene. And I'm not just talking about a messy room here. We've all been there.
Right, right.
Imagine a teen who used to take pride in their appearance, loved basketball, always showered after practice. Now they're skipping showers even after practice,
Mm.
neglecting basic self-care.
Right. It's like it's beyond laziness at that point.
Exactly. That shift can be a signal that something deeper is going on.
Like they're trying to avoid something almost.
Yeah, you start to wonder what's changed, what are they trying to avoid, what's going on beneath the surface.
Exactly.
Another sign can be a sudden and drastic change in friend groups, especially if those new friends are associated with substance use.
Okay, so again, looking for those patterns, those shifts that deviate from the teen's baseline.
Yeah.
But how do you differentiate between, like, normal teenage angst and behavior and something more serious? I mean, teenagehood is all about change, right?
You're right, it's tricky. Context is key.
Yeah.
So for instance, yeah, mood swings, totally normal part of adolescence, right?
Right.
But we'd be more concerned if those mood swings become extreme, if they last for a really long time, or if they start to interfere with the teen's daily life.
Okay, so it's not just the mood swing itself, it's how it's impacting them overall.
Exactly. And are there other changes happening at the same time?
Mm.
Sleep disturbances, slipping grades, withdrawing from activities they used to love.
So it's like putting together a puzzle, looking at the whole picture,
Exactly.
not just one piece.
You got it.
But what happens when you start to see those red flags? You're concerned, but the teen, they're resistant to help.
Right.
That's where things get really tricky, right?
You do. They do. And it's where the topic of involuntary commitment often comes up. which is a whole other conversation.
A heavy one, for sure.
Yeah, definitely. It's not about punishing the teen. It's about recognizing that addiction, at its core, it impacts decision making.
It's a disease, not a choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like their ability to make those choices, those rational choices, is kind of hijacked by the addiction itself.
Right. It's taking over.
Exactly. You see, addiction, it actually changes the brain, like physically alters those reward pathways,
Wow.
creates this intense craving, this drive to seek out the substance, even when it's clearly having these negative consequences.
Right. It's like they know it's bad, but they can't help it.
Exactly. It's a force, a powerful force to overcome.
And that's where I imagine involuntary commitment comes in, not as a punishment, but more as a way to intervene when it's really, really serious.
Right.
When their safety's at risk, maybe even the safety of others.
Exactly. And you're right. It's not a decision that anyone takes lightly.
Right.
It's a whole process, often involves court orders, evaluations, and it's different. Everywhere you go, every state has its own rules.
So complicated.
Oh, very. It's definitely not a simple or a straightforward path by any means. It's always a last resort.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit.
Sure.
For someone listening who's thinking, okay, this is really resonating, but where do I even begin? What are some of the specific substances we should be like most aware of? The ones that often lead teens down this path towards needing residential treatment.
It's a good question, and sadly, alcohol is still a major one.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It's easy to forget how accessible it is and, honestly, how often underage drinking is just kind of brushed aside.
It's true. It's like this weird rite of passage in some ways.
Yeah, it's almost expected.
Which is so scary when you think about it.
It is, because it's not just about, sneaking a beer at a party.
Right.
We're talking about chronic, heavy drinking. And in adolescence, that can lead to physical dependence, tolerance, and it really sets the stage for a lifetime of potential struggles with alcohol.
Not to mention what it's doing to their brains at that age. I mean, they're still developing.
Exactly. Those impacts on brain development are huge. We can't underestimate that.
Absolutely. And what about other substances? Opioids have been a huge concern in recent years, even beyond teens.
They have. And it's not just heroin anymore. We're seeing teens abusing prescription opioids, fentanyl. It's a different landscape than it used to be.
It's so scary.
It is. And those prescription opioids, you're right, it often starts with access at home. Maybe a prescription for someone else in the household.
Which is why it's so important for parents to be really mindful of, like, medication storage and having those open conversations about the dangers of misusing any prescription drugs.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder that these dangers can be a lot closer than we realize.
Closer than we think, for sure.
And the research we looked at, it highlighted that along with opioids, marijuana, cocaine, and methamphetamine are also big contributors to teens ending up in residential treatment.
So it's really a range of substances, but the common thread is they all have that potential for addiction,
That's
right?
it.
They all mess with that reward system in the brain. It's like they're hijacking it.
That's a great way to put it.
It makes you realize how important it is to talk to teens about this stuff. And not just in a like say no to drugs kind of way,
Right.
but in a way that really empowers them to make informed decisions.
I completely agree. And that's where understanding the treatment itself is so crucial, whether it's residential treatment, outpatient programs, therapy. Knowledge is power.
Absolutely. So speaking of treatment, we talked about the structure, the support provided in residential treatment, but what does it actually look like day to day?
Yeah.
What are those teens engaging in?
That's a great question because it's not just about taking away the substance, right?
Right.
The goal is to get to the root of what's going on, give them the tools to navigate life without relying on substances to cope.
So it's a lot deeper than just breaking that physical dependence. It's about those emotional and psychological aspects too.
Exactly. So we're talking individual therapy, group therapy, family counseling, often tailored to the individual's specific needs.
Okay, so it's not one size fits all.
Not at all. For example, a lot of residential treatment centers now specialize in trauma-informed care or dual diagnosis treatment.
I've heard that term before, dual diagnosis, but to be honest, I'm not entirely sure what it means.
Oh, sure. It just means that the person is dealing with both a substance use disorder and a mental health condition at the same time.
Oh, okay.
So it could be depression, anxiety, PTSD, eating disorders. Those often go hand in hand with addiction.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. Like you can't really treat one without addressing the other.
Right. It's about the whole person.
Exactly. Not just the addiction in isolation.
Exactly. Recognizing that addiction is complex.
For sure. So with all of that in mind, how do you measure success? Like what does it look like for a teen to go through residential treatment and then re-enter the world?
Well, it's not about guaranteeing they'll never, ever struggle again. That's unrealistic.
Right, it's a lifelong thing for some people.
Exactly. It's about giving them a strong foundation for long-term recovery. And that looks different for everyone. But generally, we're talking about reduced cravings, better coping skills, stronger support systems.
So it's really about equipping them with the tools to like navigate life without needing that crutch.
Exactly. It's about progress, not perfection.
I like that. Progress, not perfection.
And it takes ongoing support even after they leave that structured environment.
It's like they're learning to walk again almost.
Yeah. In a way, it's a huge adjustment.
So aftercare, that's got to be crucial, right?
Yes, that transition back to the real world.
Yeah.
It's full of potential triggers.
Right, all those things they were shielded from.
Exactly. So aftercare, it could be outpatient therapy, support groups, sober living. It really depends on the individual and what they need to stay on track.
So it's like they're learning to swim in the pool before they're tossed in the ocean.
I like that analogy.
Right.
Yeah.
They need those skills.
It takes practice, patience, and yeah, there might be some setbacks along the way.
Which is normal, right? Like any learning process.
Exactly. It's not always going to be smooth sailing.
Right.
But the important thing is they have the support and they've learned those skills to navigate those rough waters without, completely losing sight of their recovery.
And to remember that a relapse, it doesn't equal failure. It's just another opportunity to learn and adjust, right?
100%. It's
Yeah.
about progress, not perfection.
We've covered so much ground here. It's a lot to take in.
Yeah, it is.
For someone listening who's maybe feeling a little overwhelmed, what's the one thing you really want them to remember from our deep dive today?
Honestly, just that they're not alone.
Yeah.
Whether they're a parent worried sick about their kid, a teenager struggling with substances, or even just someone who wants to understand all this better, there are resources out there. There is hope. Recovery is possible.
Sometimes just knowing that you're not alone in all of this,
Huge.
it makes a world of difference.
It does. Addiction thrives on silence,
Right, keeping it bottled up.
Open conversations, even if they're tough, those are powerful. They can really make a difference.
Absolutely. And speaking of resources, are there any specific organizations or websites that you recommend, for people who want to learn more or find support?
Absolutely. The National Institute on Drug Abuse and IDEA, they have a really great website, tons of info for teens and parents.
Okay.
And the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, another fantastic resource. They have a helpline you can call to find local treatment providers, support groups, all of that.
Perfect. We'll be sure to link to those in the show notes as well.
Perfect.
And don't underestimate the power of those closer to home, right? Like teachers, school counselors, even trusted family friends.
Oh, absolutely. They can be amazing allies.
Yeah.
The more we can just talk about this stuff openly, mental health, substance use, the easier it becomes to get help without feeling ashamed.
100%. So to wrap this all up, if there's one key takeaway, one final thought, it's reach out, talk to someone.
Yes.
You are not alone.